Today, I want to revisit a video I made earlier this year that I put up, as you can see, on January 8th of this year, 2022. It was titled, America Should Emulate Communist China.
Uh-oh, spaghetti-o.
Obviously, I meant that title tongue-in-cheek. I was responding to the who's who of political dipshits, both on the left and on the right, who have been applauding measures taken by the Chinese Communist Party up until January of 2022. But more so the people on the left, the more Marxist, socialist types, who were applauding China's strategy, their zero COVID strategy, their draconian policies of trying to prevent COVID from spreading. A lot of people were applauding this. One of whom was this guy named Richard Wolff, who many on the left consider to be a brilliant economist. He described himself as a Marxist economist. He's a guest on shows like Sam Cedar and Breaking Points. Breaking Points, Crystal and Sagar, populist left, populist right, coming together to own the establishment, you guys. Well, Richard Wolff, even just days after I published my video and I brought in a bunch of articles about horror stories that are going on in China because of these zero COVID lockdowns, people selling their tablets, their Nintendo Switches for bags of rice because the Chinese Communist Party was not giving sufficient enough rations to people in these locked down regions. People losing their babies to miscarriages due to a lack of healthcare services due to their zero COVID strategy. But even after all of these reports, maybe Richard Wolff just did not get the memo. This is a video that was published by Democracy at Work. Richard Wolff's YouTube channel has 290,000 subscribers. This video has almost 60,000 views. You can see that it's unlisted. Maybe Democracy at Work and Richard Wolff, maybe they're embarrassed by this. Maybe Richard Wolff has since reversed his hot take on applauding China, communist China, for their zero COVID strategy. I still have yet to see him walk this back, although this video, even though it's unlisted, I found it because it was linked on clips of this particular video. But here's what Richard Wolff was saying, even after all of these horror stories were coming out of China.
And these are numbers that I took as of January 8th, 2022, as provided.
January 8th. Same video. I uploaded my video asking whether or not we should emulate communist China. I think the obvious answer is
by the World Health Organization as reliable and as neutral an agency as exists for statistics like this. In the United States, 57.5 million people have gotten this disease. Right? 57.5 million Americans, 20%, 1 in 5, have gotten this disease. In the People's Republic of China, a country with 4 times the number of people that we have in America, in the United States, the total number of cases of COVID is 133,000. Yes, you heard that right.
You heard that right.
In the United States, 57.5 million. In the People's Republic of China, much larger country, 133,000. Let's turn next to deaths, people who've died from the COVID disease as kept by the medical personnel that attended them when they died. In the United States, again, as of January 8th, 826,000 deaths. In the People's Republic of China, a country 4 times larger, a total of 5,700 deaths. 826,000 versus 5.7 thousand.
See, guys, communist China has clearly handled COVID better than the United States.
There is no comparison here. None.
No comparison.
Fully vaccinated.
According to Richard Wolff, it's ridiculous to even compare the United States to communist China.
In the United States, 60%. In China, 83%. I'll stop. The point is made. But I can't leave it without a memory. When I was a child growing up here in the United States, I remember our teacher. I believe it was around the time of the Korean War, telling us how we should understand that folks in Asia seem to have less respect for human life than people here in the United States. I didn't think much about it. It didn't make much of an impression. I probably didn't understand exactly what was being said. But I do know what evidence this set of numbers gives us. One part of the world has allowed 826 people to die, 826,000 people to die. And that other part of the world, much larger, has allowed only 133,000. If you want to draw conclusions about respect for life, it runs exactly the other way from what my teacher told me all those years ago.
See, communist China, they respect human life more than the United States.
What is going on? And my argument for you is that we have an economic system, our capitalism, particularly here in the West.
And look what it comes up on this video. Karl Marx. No big deal or anything. This guy only taught economics at universities like University of Massachusetts Amherst,
which was uniquely unable to prepare for or to cope with this disease.
Yeah, capitalist America, they were unable to deal with and cope with COVID-19.
And it's very important to see that connection between the economic system and the horrific failure to cope with, to manage this disease the way other countries. And China is by far not the only one. I could have picked New Zealand. I could have picked all manner of other countries of varying economic systems. But
he picks China because they're still ruled by the Communist Party there.
Choosing the two global world powers
is
an important thing to focus on as well. So what do I mean we didn't prepare for? Simple. We all know what a virus needs because we've had viruses in the past and in the near past as well. We know. We know we need tests. We know we need masks.
Of course, he's not mentioning the draconian lockdowns.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
We know we need ventilators. We know we need hospital beds and ICU units.
And to the extent that American hospitals had a shortage of these things, it was due largely to government intervention in medicine and healthcare, notably certificate of demand, certificate of need laws in many states, where hospitals need permissions from the government to add hospital beds and ventilators and other equipment.
And medical personnel. We know it all.
But remember, guys, it's all because of unfettered, unregulated capitalism.
Blow it out your ass.
We know we're going to be affected by viruses sooner or later, and we know what we need to handle them, or at least part of what we need. And we have the companies here in the United States, the private enterprises.
Yeah, it was private enterprises' fault, you guys.
We pride ourselves on, right, that we have a private enterprise kind of capitalism here. We have the enterprises that could have made all of those things, could have produced them, could have stored them around the country in the right places, in the right quantities.
Keep this in mind. He's talking as if the U.S. healthcare system lags behind a country like communist China. Keep this in mind.
so that we would be prepared. But they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And there's no way around this. Not only did they not do it in advance, they still haven't done it.
They still have not done it.
If I had more time, I would tell you about my wife and I wandering around the city of New York for hours 3 days ago, looking to buy home testing kits.
All right. So I think that's enough with Richard Wolff. But it wasn't just Richard Wolff who were pondering this, whether or not the United States should emulate communist China's strategy to COVID. In November of 2021, people at NPR were discussing this, what the U.S. can learn from China's response to COVID infections. Even the New York Times, this article on the New York Times from February 5th of 2021 by Stephen Lee Myers, Keith Bradshaw, Sue Lee Wee, and Chris Buckley, titled Power, Patriotism, and 1.4 billion people, How China Beat the Virus and Roared Back. Article says, in the year since the coronavirus began its march around the world, China has done what many other countries would not or could not do, with equal measures of coercion,
SpaghettiOs!
And persuasion. It has mobilized its vast Communist Party apparatus to reach deep into the private sector and the broader population in what the country's leader Xi Jinping has called the People's War against the pandemic, and won. China is now reaping long-lasting benefits that few expected when the virus first emerged in the central Chinese city of Wuhan, and the leadership seemed as rattled as at any moment since the Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989. The success has positioned China well economically and diplomatically to push back against the United States and others worried about its seemingly inexorable rise. It has also emboldened Mr. Xi, who has offered China's experience as a model for others to follow.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Now, in all fairness to the writers of this article, they did make comments about how the CCP went too far, notably with their crackdowns on free speech and protests and whatnot, but thought there was a part in this article that was pretty telling and fitting. You see, they have this big picture of quarantine centers with the signs on the roofs that say, we will win.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
And you notice the sentence right before their picture. The government appeals to material interests as well as to a sense of patriotism, duty, and self-sacrifice. Don't make me tap the sign, you guys. Anyway, why am I bringing this all back up? Why am I doing a follow-up to my video from 11 months ago and reminding everyone of this? A reason why is because you know who might not be on board with the sentiments of people like Richard Wolff and the people who wrote this article on the New York Times, and people pondering whether or not the United States should emulate communist China's strategy to COVID. You know who might disagree with some of the sentiment? Is people who are reportedly in China protesting against the government's zero COVID strategy. Here's one video on the Washington Post titled Everything You Need to Know About China's Zero COVID Protests. There's another video on CNN titled Chilling. Protester tells CNN what the atmosphere is like in China. And according to the Washington Post video, I'm not going to play it here. I recommend everyone check these videos out and read stories on your own time and own behalf. But at least according to the Washington Post video, a lot of these protests started due to an apartment fire in one of these lockdown regions in China where 10 people died in the apartment fire. And a lot of these protests and a lot of people speculate that some, if not all of the 10 people who died in the apartment fire, they might have been rescued if it weren't for these zero COVID barriers to movement within the city that may have prevented emergency services from responding soon enough to the fire. Oops. And in all fairness, I don't think these protests are entirely about the zero COVID lockdowns in China. Part of it is due to failed economic policies, namely in the housing sector and real estate sector, which, if you recall my video, this was a measure that was applauded by people on the so-called populist right, like Tucker Carlson, who were applauding the CCP for their crackdowns on real estate speculation. And as we're going to see, these measures have not exactly solved the housing problems that exist in communist China.
No surprise there.
This is an issue that Joseph Sternberg talks about in his article on the Wall Street Journal. Xi Jinping's approaches multiple points of no return. Beijing assumes it can change course. If policies fail, zero COVID shows this is no longer the case. This was put up on December 1st of 2022, this year. Article talks about how now Mr. Xi has stumbled into several policy errors, some his, others his predecessors, that may turn out to be irreversible. The nub of his COVID disaster is that he no longer has any good exits. Having committed himself to a policy that is triggering significant popular unrest, he is realizing that the alternative is equally dire. Easing up on zero COVID now would mean letting the virus rip through a population with limited immunity and developed country expectations of China's developing country healthcare system. Recall when Richard Wolff was talking as if the United States healthcare system was in any way inferior to China's healthcare system. The human suffering would be dire and the political ramifications hard to fathom once Chinese citizens notice that 3 years of their lockdown misery did not, in fact, save their loved ones. The same authoritarian system that allowed Mr. Xi to institute zero COVID makes it essentially impossible for him to duck the blame. Elsewhere, vigorous public debate and serial elections have forced citizens to buy into some acceptable COVID policy or other. Not so in China, where whatever happens now is all Mr. Xi's fault. He has accidentally made a choice he cannot undo, and it's not the only one. And it's not just the Wall Street Journal talking about this. I also saw an article on the LA Times, Los Angeles Times, by Stephanie Yang and Melissa Healy, put up also on December 1st, titled, "Zero COVID is roiling China, but ending the policy may cause a massive health disaster." But going back to the Wall Street Journal article, it talks about how another pressing example concerns the property market, where Mr. Xi is struggling to control what he had hoped would be a gradual deflation of the real estate balloon. Beijing's overlapping goals are to reduce several decades worth of dangerous leverage and uncontrolled speculation, while consolidating the industry in state hands and moderating house price growth to keep homeownership within reach for the rising middle class. No prizes for guessing what could go wrong, as many things have.
No surprise there.
And despite real estate prices, housing prices coming down in communist China, there's also a mortgage boycott. And many people in China are not buying because they are losing trust in what's going on in China, because many people have borrowed money to buy real estate and apartments that have not yet been built. So it's almost 2023, meaning that China has resorted to these strict lockdowns, especially on large cities, large production centers in China, for almost 3 years now. Measures that were applauded by people like Richard Wolff and others because of the low case count and low death count and whatnot, especially compared to the United States and other more capitalist countries. Well, because of a lot of these lockdowns, much of China's population has developed little to no natural immunity to the virus. On top of that, the vaccines that are used in China are at best, half as good as the vaccines in the United States and in Europe. This is according to an article on the Wall Street Journal, their editorial board, on November 29th, titled, China's Failed COVID Vaccine Nationalism. Beijing rejected foreign mRNA shots, putting its citizens at greater risk.
You absolutely suck!
Article talks about how central to Mr. Xi's aggressive nationalism is selling the Chinese public on the superiority of China's political system. Oh, who else has been doing that, huh? Huh? China's leaders may have felt that they could not accept Western vaccines lest they concede that the country still trails the West in some areas. They have also felt that they could steal the mRNA technology. When Moderna sought to sell its vaccine in China, Beijing tried to extort the U.S. biotech leader by demanding it hand over its intellectual property, according to a Financial Times report last month. Moderna wisely declined. Which I guess, someone like Richard Wolff, he can still blame this on corporate greed, because Moderna would not cave to the CCP's insane demands to let the vaccine into their country. No. He's not going to blame the Communist Party for locking this vaccine out of the Chinese market, which may have helped them avert this crisis they're dealing with. May have helped save millions of people in China. No. Instead, he'll probably just blame Big Pharma. Ooh! But it sounds like that communist China is stuck in the spring of 2020 with a lose-lose situation of either continuing to operate China as if it's a gigantic prison, or letting loose, lifting up all of the restrictions, and potentially dealing with overwhelmed hospitals and overwhelmed graveyards, which does not even mention the fact that businesses, partly due to these COVID restrictions and lockdowns in China, are trying to move out of communist China. This is according to many sources. This is on CNBC by Evelyn Chang, titled American Companies Increasingly Look Outside of China After COVID, saying that the top reasons for doing so were COVID-related shutdowns, travel restrictions, and supply chain disruptions, survey respondents said. There's also this article on the New York Times from September 1st of 2022 by Daisuke Wakabayashi and Trip Mickle, titled Tech Companies Slowly Shift Production Away from China. Worried about geopolitical tensions and stung by pandemic shutdowns, Google, Apple, and others are moving some work to nearby countries. Even earlier today, another article on the Wall Street Journal by Yang Ji and Aaron Tilley, titled Apple Makes Plans to Move Production Out of China. There's another article, Foreign Policy Magazine by Elizabeth Braw. Companies are fleeing China for friendlier shores. This was back in August. Talks about how part of this is pandemic pressure. China's zero COVID policy has snarled supply chains and left factory workers locked in their dorms, and shows no sign of ending anytime soon. Also on National Review, Business Exit from China Accelerating by Dominic Pino on July 6th of 2022. Talks about, by and large, businesses are responding to the negative incentives that Xi Jinping's government has given them. It seems that the Shanghai COVID lockdowns were a turning point for many executives. This does not even mention the fact the many stories that seem to suggest that the entrepreneurial spirit and creative spirit and motive has been suppressed, largely due to communist China's crackdown on the tech sector and real estate sector and free speech in general. But let's bring this back to the whole United States versus communist China debate. Recall that Richard Wolff said that there's no comparison.
You absolutely suck!
Now, when it comes to COVID, did the United States government and many local and state governments, did they make mistakes when trying to handle COVID? I think that merely saying yes would be a massive understatement. And putting COVID aside, is the United States perfect when it comes to, say, economic policy? I would say absolutely not. And anyone that's familiar with my YouTube channel knows that a lot of my content involves criticizing U.S. economic policy from both major political parties. So I am by no means suggesting or saying that the United States is perfect. The United States is a mixed economy whose economic problems often stem from government intervention into the economy. But comparing the United States to communist China, arguing that communist China is this model that countries like America should emulate, it would be like trying to argue that a tricycle is a preferred mode of transportation to, say, a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with, say, 70,000 miles. I could imagine someone like a Richard Wolff trying to bring in statistics, maybe talking about how tricycle-related fatalities are virtually zero. Meanwhile, there are many automobile-related fatalities every single day as he focuses on all of the maintenance issues and problems with the said used 2012 Toyota Camry, while also ignoring the massive advantages that come with automobile ownership versus a tricycle. Anyone who tries to argue that communist China is a model that the United States ought to emulate should be laughed out of the fucking room. Oh, what happened to, oh my God, why is Apple News, suddenly, what happened? All of the text got gobbledygooked up. Look at this. I can't read this shit.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
All right, let's, having some technical difficulties. All right, we'll just quit Apple News for a second. $9.99 a month for this shit.